am the king." Lian grinned contentedly. He knew that the emperor was afraid of this prophecy. This weakness made it easier for him to make a deal with the empress, who was jealous of Fernanda for the princess. Looking sternly at Lian, the emperor ordered the princess to have more watchers and asked forgiveness for what had happened, saying that he remembered the promise he had made. Looking at the emperor contentedly, Lian agreed, grinning victoriously. Thinking about it, Liliana thought that she needed to fix her brother and Lian first. Thinking about the escape plan, Liliana realized that all the jewelry was in the emperor's possession, and without money, it was impossible to escape. The princess thought that she needed to find someone whom even Lian would not dare to touch. The princess remembered that the knight watching over her was always talking about one person whose family even the emperor did not dare to show disrespect, and the one who would accept even a princess who had killed 5 husbands. Upon meeting with the emperor, Dietrich informed him that he knew Barley, to which the emperor replied that he should rest before heading home. The archduke replied that he could not be absent from his lands for a long time, wishing to leave the residence as soon as possible. Smiling meanly, the emperor said that he needed the help of the Archduke of Winchester. The princess opened her eyes, and the picture of the emperor and Dietrich talking about whether it was a dream, she thought, was still in her mind. Thinking back to her meeting with Winchester before the wedding, she thought that she seemed to understand why the Archduke had been cold to her. Standing at the window, the princess thought that everyone had come to the funeral except the Archduke. The door opened abruptly. The princess turned to the noise. The thought that the Archduke had arrived flashed into her head. And Liliana was not mistaken. The Archduke entered the hall and headed towards the coffin. The princess called to Dietrich, and the Archduke turned around, looking at her. The man asked what was the matter. Looking awkwardly at Winchester, Dragnia asked him to give her some time because she had something to discuss with him. Looking sternly at the princess, Dietrich nodded and approached her, asking her to say now. Looking awkwardly at the Duke, Liliana said that he was busy now, which Winchester did not deny. Raising her head, the princess thought that there would be no other opportunity and she could not miss it. Clutching the hem of her dress, Liliana thought that she should not repeat the past and must save her life. Looking confidently at Dietrich, the princess thought that she needed an archduke. His power and family would save her. Liliana said that she had a request, thinking that she should use it for her own purposes no matter what happened. Looking displeased at Dragnia, the archduke asked why she needed his help if she had literally everything. Liliana grew gloomy. The archduke's words were a threat that the princess immediately recognized. Looking firmly at the Archduke, Liliana confidently asked to be made the Grand Duchess of the Archduke. The Archduke calmly looked at the princess, completely ignoring her words. Liliana felt embarrassed, so she asked if the Archduke had heard what she had just said. The Archduke said that he would pretend that he had not heard anything, throwing it off to the fact that the princess was simply shocked by the loss of her husband. Looking menacingly at Liliana, Dietrich said that he did not understand how, in a different situation, a princess could propose to a man at her husband's funeral. Hearing the words about the marriage proposal, the princess blushed awkwardly as she continued to stare at Dietrich. Under the Archduke's firm gaze, Liliana thought that Winchester had misunderstood her. Looking at each other, the princess made sure that Dietrich had misunderstood her proposal. Believing that the situation looked ridiculous, the princess was sure that the Archduke was much less stunned than Liliana. Looking awkwardly at Winchester, the girl thought that she still had a chance to resolve this misunderstanding. The princess called to the Archduke, to which the Duke closed his eyes, declaring that he was leaving. Liliana, looking at him firmly, said that she had not yet finished speaking. Turning around, the Archduke asked before leaving if the princess wanted to make him her 6th deceased husband. The princess felt embarrassed. The Archduke did not even listen to her, understanding the words of the heroine not at all in the way she wanted. Turning around, the Archduke looked at Liliana in irritation and said that if not, then the conversation was over. Looking after Dietrich, Dragnia thought that she was not even surprised by the man's behavior. The princess had heard that Winchester was a very honest man, and that he hated the imperial family. Clutching a lock of hair in her hand, the princess thought that it would not be easy to gain the favor of the Archduke. Walking calmly, the princess thought that she still had time, and that the Archduke did not immediately agree even to the best. Calling Mary to her, the princess said that she needed to visit the vault. The princess suggested that Viscount Barley's property had not yet been confiscated, because the emperor took all the belongings of his daughter's deceased husbands to his vault as if it belonged to him. Mary asked the princess again. Thinking that she had never received a cent or complained every time, the princess took Mary's hand. Looking resolutely at the servant, Liliana announced that she was going to keep the Viscount's property for herself, as it should be. The maid looked at Liliana in surprise, thinking that the princess had not needed money before. Thinking that the emperor had taken care of the princess, Mary thought that the princess had nothing and lived like a doll of Fernanda. Looking confidently at her maidservant, Dragnia said that someone from the palace must come to the residence to confiscate all the property. Smiling, Mary asked how she could help, thinking that things were changing. The princess, sorting through the documents in her office, looked displeased at the paper about the army, created in secret. Liliana wondered if the emperor and Leon had learned about the Viscount's secret military power. The maid looked softly at the princess, smiling, while Dragnia thought that despite the large amount of time, she had a lot to do. Sitting on horseback, the Archduke looked to the side. The knight greeted him. Jumping off his horse, Dietrich asked about the emperor, to which the knight replied that Fernand had returned to the palace. Helping the Archduke to remove his cloak, the knight asked if Winchester was all right. Looking at the knight with displeasure, Dietrich asked what he meant. The knight said that after all, the man was with the princess. Turning to the knight, Dietrich asked, with his arms crossed over his chest, if the knight thought of the princess as some kind of monster. Looking awkwardly at his master, the knight apologized, saying that the duke had misunderstood him. Dietrich was displeased with the knight's words. The Archduke, leaving, said that upon returning home, the training of the knights would increase tenfold. Entering Dietrich's chambers, the knight John asked what had happened in the palace. Returning from there, Winchester looked more gloomy. Looking out of the window, the Archduke waited for a pause and said that there was only a widow in the palace mourning for her husband. After the image of Liliana surfaced in Winchester's mind, the Archduke confirmed his words. Looking out of the window, the Archduke thought that the princess was in such despair that she had gone mad. Lowering her head, the Archduke's face expressed doubt. Dietrich was sure that she did not look crazy. There was a knock at the Archduke's chambers. John entered and informed Dietrich that they had arrived from the palace. As soon as Winchester allowed him to enter, Leon entered the room, looking slyly at the man. He put his hand to his chest and greeted Dietrich. Raising his hand with the envelope, Leon said that he had brought a message from the emperor. The letter said that Winchester's army, like the Archduke himself, should linger and await Fernanda's instructions. Leaning the paper against his face, Leon announced that the imperial wedding was to take place in a month, and the emperor ordered the Archduke's armies to protect the bride and groom on their wedding night, as this would be the wedding of the first princess. Looking angrily at Leon, Dietrich asked who in 4 days would stop the monsters that would emerge from the heart of Simpson's forest. Trembling, Leon looked at the Archduke with displeasure. He hadn't expected such a harsh question. Leon asked if there was anyone else who could protect Winter City from the monsters that day, his face showing that he had no intention of letting Winchester and his army go back. Looking at Leon, the Archduke said that Winchester's army was the only one that could stand up to the monsters. Looking displeased at the Archduke, Leon said that it was not in their interest to upset the emperor. He asked Dietrich to stay for another month. The Archduke grew gloomy. He said that he could not return with the army. Calling John, the Archduke told him that Leon was leaving and asked him to see him off. Leon looked at the Archduke angrily as he turned around before leaving the room, Leon trembling with anger. The princess smiled at the battered carriage. Butler Jonathan looked at her dubiously, asking if she was a good fit. Touching the shabby fabric with which the carriage was covered, the princess said that the carriage was suitable. The princess was sure that the emperor had sent spies to her today, and not ordinary guards and maids. Turning to Jonathan, the princess told him that no one should know that the princess had left the palace. Getting into the carriage, Liliana and Mary drove away. The maid told the princess that the princess had nothing to worry about, which Liliana found strange. Smiling awkwardly, Mary told the princess that she had given the servants liquor in honor of the party. The princess looked at Mary curiously. The maid explained that she had added sleeping pills to the alcohol, so everyone would be asleep. Smiling gently, Liliana complimented Mary, calling her a young woman and looking at her kindly. The carriage stopped at a house. Mary got out first and, holding out her hand to Liliana, helped her down. Looking at the maid, Liliana asked to wait for her here, squeezing her cloak a little. Mary looked at the princess worriedly. She did not understand the princess and thought that it was dangerous to leave Liliana alone. Mary handed Liliana a dagger, asking her to take it with her so that the princess could defend herself. The princess was curious. She began to examine the dagger, carefully holding it in her hands. Looking at the princess confidently, Mary explained that she had smeared the blade with a toxin that her brother had helped Mary with, and the princess would need to cut the attacker and run. Unable to refuse the servant girl who was looking confidently at the princess, Liliana awkwardly agreed. Pulling the hood tighter over her head, the princess looked forward, exhaling. Standing up from the table, the Archduke said that Leon himself knew about the situation in the city. The monsters of Simpson's Forest would not wait for the army. As she climbed the stairs, the princess thought that she should have cleaned herself up. As Liliana approached the door, she overheard Dietrich and Leon talking about how the heart of Simpson's Forest was unstoppable. Continuing to listen, the princess heard that her wedding was planned to be postponed. Leon said that he would let the army go on one condition, which alerted the princess. When Leon said that Winchester would have to stay, Liliana recognized his voice and recoiled from the door, covering her mouth with her hands. Following Leon, the Archduke tried to object, but Leon said that he had already compromised, and it would be fair for Dietrich to agree. Standing outside the door, the princess remembered that she had ignored Leon at the funeral when he came with the emperor. Clutching the dagger in her hands, the princess thought about her desire to kill Leon, using the blade that the maid gave her. Suddenly, the princess was abruptly grabbed by the shoulder with the words that, "Even in this place there are rats." Turning Liliana to face him, the Duke asked if it was the princess, and Liliana looked at Winchester in surprise. Dietrich irritably asked what the princess was doing, to which the princess could not find words. Looking at Dragnia in surprise, Dietrich asked how she could get there in such a suspicious place, where many well-armed knights clutching the girl's shoulders. He talked about the fact that she could have been killed. As she continued to listen to the Archduke, the princess looked at him embarrassedly, thinking that the man was too close to her. Gloomy, the princess asked Dietrich if he would believe her if she told her that there was something worse than death. The princess looked awkwardly at the man. The Archduke silently looked back. Looking confidently at the man, the heroine declared that she was destined to die anyway if the Archduke did not help her. Dietrich looked at her in bewilderment. Looking resolutely at Dietrich, the princess said that it made no difference to her where she died. Turning around, the Archduke looked at Leon, who asked him to reconsider his decision. As he left, Leon looked askance at the Archduke, who was staring out of the corner of his eye at Liliana. As he was leaving, Leon said that he would report this conversation to the Emperor, and that was the end of their conversation. Winchester, with Liliana behind him, wished Leon a good trip. The Archduke looked after Leon with displeasure. The princess looked awkwardly over his shoulder. Looking at Liliana, the man asked her what was the reason for her coming to this place. Looking resolutely at the Archduke, the princess called to him, tugging at the sleeve of his robe. Clutching the hem of her cape, the princess looked confidently at Winchester and declared that he had to save her. Looking calmly at the princess, Dietrich asked if he could regard this as a threat. The princess was determined. It was clear from her look that she was not going to retreat. Liliana asked if it would work if she began to threaten. The princess listened silently as the Archduke listed the names of Dragnia's former deceased husbands. Winchester, frowning at Liliana, asked if she wanted to say that he would be next on this list. When the Archduke asked if this was an order from the Emperor, the princess replied by saying that she had come of her own free will. Turning away, Winchester said that he did not care. He had already been informed that the princess would marry again in 6 months. Looking down, the princess blushed with anger, thinking about how crazy Fernand and Leon were. When the princess said that she was not going to marry Leon, the Archduke asked her again if he would definitely be her next husband. The princess was dumbfounded when she realized that Leon had not told Dietrich that he would become the princess's fiancé himself. He was disgusting. The princess confirmed her words, saying that this may not happen if Dietrich marries her. Raising his head, the Archduke expressed his displeasure, calling the princess's words nonsense. After a pause, the princess looked at the Duke resolutely, declaring that she could help Winter gain independence. The Archduke smirked, asking if the princess thought the Winchester family was incapable of handling it on her own. Tilting her head forward slightly, the princess did not lower her eyes, saying that this was not what she meant at all. Remembering her past life, the princess remembered that Winter never became independent because the emperor refused to vacate the territory of the city. The princess was sure that even after her death, the emperor would not allow Winter to become free. The princess asked the Archduke about his opinion that Winter could become independent much earlier. Winchester tried to object, but the princess was unstoppable. She asked for 3 years, saying that if Dietrich made her Grand Duchess, Winter would become independent in that time, and the princess would leave the duchy at the end of that period. Clenching his fist, the Archduke asked how he could appoint someone as mistress of his house if he did not trust him. Looking at Dietrich's stern gaze, the princess thought that this man was not one to buy into lies, realizing that she had to tell him only the truth. Looking confidently at Winchester, Liliana said emphatically that she no longer wanted to be a puppet. With his arms crossed over his chest, Dietrich looked out of the window, from which he could see the princess's carriage. The Archduke recalled the words of the princess that she could even annul the marriage so as not to harm the Archduke. Frowning out the window, the Duke thought that the princess had sacrificed her safety to get to him. Standing with his back to Alex, Dietrich asked what the servant knew about the first princess. Bowing his head, Alex called Liliana the Emperor's precious doll, like a flower in a vase. Looking sideways, Alex said that he was sure that all Liliana's husbands were from the opposition party, and this was not a coincidence. However, there was no evidence that the Emperor used his daughter, because the nobles themselves sent marriage proposals. But no one knew whether the princess was forced into these marriages, and it cannot be proved. Looking out the window, Dietrich said that in a month, Liliana would have her 6th wedding. Looking at the Archduke, Alex asked how the princess could marry for the 6th time in a year, after which the servant added that only a fool would marry the princess. When Alex heard that Leon would be the 6th husband of the princess, he was surprised. Alex found this strange, since Leon was the emperor's assistant, asking if Dietrich felt the same way. Winchester remembered the princess's words that she would make everyone pay for ruining her life. Smiling, the princess said that she would wait for Dietrich's answer, but warned that she had little time. After leaving Dietrich, the princess went back to the palace, the carriage speeding along the road. Looking at the princess, Mary asked how the meeting went, to which the princess replied that she thought it would work out. Smiling, the maid said that she would prepare a relaxing tea for the princess when she returned. The princess, smiling sweetly, slightly closing her eyes, thanked the servant. Returning to the palace, the princess did not enter immediately. Through the crack, she examined the entrance to the palace. Something was wrong. The guards were guarding the doors. The princess realized what they had learned about her leaving the palace. Turning abruptly to the maid, Liliana handed her an envelope, ordering her to give it to Dietrich immediately. Mary was surprised by the princess's behavior, asking why the princess would not go with her. Liliana could not leave. Otherwise, Fernand would search the entire empire to return his daughter to the palace. Liliana was frightened to hear Dragnia say that her life now depended on Mary. The emperor should not take this envelope. Praying that the contents of the envelope would interest the Archduke, the princess watched as the guards approached her with torches, shouting that they had found the princess. Going to Dietrich, Alex reported that the princess's maid had arrived. The servant said that he had seen this girl before with the princess, so he did not think she was lying. Mary looked at the Archduke with tears in her eyes. Handing Dietrich an envelope as he approached the maid, Mary said that she had been ordered to hand it over. Taking the document out of the envelope, the Archduke began to read it. Dietrich was surprised at what was written in it. Lying on the bed, the princess thought about how the emperor's suspicions had been inevitable since she had refused the marriage. Hearing the creak of the door, the princess realized that someone was coming in and quickly stood up, taking a sitting position on the bed. Leon entered the chambers, followed by a maid with a tray on which stood a cup of tea. When Leon sat down next to the princess, Liliana flinched. She became anxious at such actions on his part. The princess grew gloomy. She thought about what else she had to endure because she was too weak. Clutching the hem of her dress, the princess asked if Leon had spied on her when he said that he knew that the princess had left the palace at night. Bowing his head and closing his eyes, Leon smiled, saying that he thought that surveillance and protection were the same thing. Getting up from the bed, the princess asked who would dare to harm her. Lian said that Fernand was only trying to protect Liliana from danger. The princess began to leave, saying that she had apparently disturbed the emperor. The princess looked at Lian out of the corner of her eye as he said that the ruler had not slept all night, worried about Dragnia. However, the princess understood that Fernand was awake, not because he was worried, but because he was angry. Before leaving the princess's chambers, Lian said that the emperor would arrive soon, so the princess would need to repent of her mistakes. The princess had a thoughtful look. Looking sadly at Lian, the princess asked if the emperor was very angry. Lian smirked as he looked forward. He thought about the princess becoming docile again. Covering his mouth with his fist, Lian said that he would talk to the emperor, asking him not to disturb Fernande. After saying that she would do as Lian said, the princess thought that she felt bad. Smiling, Lian told the princess to rest, waving his hand to the maid. Reminding Liliana of her medicines, Lian asked her not to miss appointments, and the maid handed the princess a cup on a tray. Clenching her hand into a fist, the princess looked at the cup in shock. She remembered this medicine. Lian gave it to the princess daily. It was supposed to help clear the mind and calm the body, and it really helped the princess for a while. 371. Holding out his hand to the princess, Lian asked her to drink the contents of the cup as soon as possible, smiling. The princess's mind blurred, her eyes swam, and the princess's hearing began to blur. The princess woke up in her bed, squatting and holding her head. The princess realized that she had lost consciousness. On the table next to the bed, the princess saw a cup of medicine and called Lian a scoundrel. Looking into the cup, the princess thought about what it was, after all. It could be a catalyst, a drug to control Liliana's health, or even a storage poison. The princess wondered why she hadn't thought about it before. Indifferently watching the contents of the cup pour into the vial, the princess thought about how she really was a doll. The emperor arrived at the princess's palace and, entering, looked at her discontentedly. Looking at the emperor, the princess greeted him. The emperor told her that he had heard that Liliana had fainted and injured herself in her own home. Looking up at her father, the heroine said that it was not true, realizing that the emperor wanted to take advantage of his health to prevent the princess from returning. When the emperor asked about where the princess had gone the previous night, the princess's gaze hardened. The princess said that she wanted to feel free before the wedding, but since she is a widow, she had to sneak out. Looking sternly at his daughter, Fernand said that he had been told that the princess did not take medication and that he did not like the princess's disloyalty. Looking down, the princess apologized, saying that she would no longer miss appointments. Frowning at Liliana, the emperor said that it was better for her to marry as soon as possible for her own safety. The princess was interested in why Fernand was so fixated on marriage. Whether Lian had said anything to him while the princess was sleeping, she had told her father that the month had not yet passed. Looking up, Liliana asked to be sent back home as she wished. Fernand looked menacingly at the princess, asking what she had just said. He was angry. As the princess continued to talk about her desire to return home, the emperor slapped her in the face. Fernand looked at the princess angrily. Liliana was shocked. She did not understand what had just happened. The emperor shouted at Liliana. He was furious that she was criticizing his decisions. It was the princess who had undermined his trust. Holding her cheek, the princess bit her lip. She was displeased with the emperor's accusations. Sometimes the princess wondered if the emperor had the right to say so. Dragnia wondered if the emperor had any affection for his daughter. The princess, even though she understood the reason for her existence, was stunned when she was told that she had been taken advantage of, even after the cruelty inflicted on her by them. She felt sorry for them. Looking at the girl, the emperor said that he would call a healer. According to him, the princess still had not come to her senses. Fernand told Liliana that she was the princess of this country. The heroine, lowering her head, agreed with him. Putting his hand on the girl's shoulder, Fernand said that he understood the princess's thirst for freedom, but she should not succumb to such feelings. The emperor was sure that Liliana would not let him down again. He asked her to confirm his confidence. Liliana, without raising her head, said that she would fulfill her father's will and get married. Someone knocked on the door. The emperor told him to leave, but from behind the door, Lian said that the archduke had arrived for an audience with the emperor. Startled, the emperor asked. The princess was glad that Mary had managed to deliver the envelope. Turning to Liliana, the emperor told her to wait for his return. Sitting in an armchair, Fernand asked what had caused the Archduke's appearance, as he usually did not arrive without orders. Looking at Dietrich, the emperor asked on what business Winchester had arrived, that such urgency was needed. Looking calmly in response, the Archduke asked to meet with the first princess. Stroking his beard, the emperor waited for a pause and said that this was impossible. It would be wrong to leave the widow alone with another man. Dietrich had no intention of retreating. He said that the conversation between them would concern Winter. The emperor was interested in Dietrich's words. He replied that the princess did not know in whose possession the city was. Looking confidently at the emperor, the Archduke offered to test the princess's knowledge. Waving his hand, Fernand ordered the princess to be brought and everyone to leave, frowning at Dietrich. The princess was brought in. The emperor sat in an armchair and looked at Liliana with displeasure. The princess greeted Dietrich, saying that she had not seen him since the funeral. Liliana's cheek was burning and her lip was broken. Greeting the princess in return, Dietrich began to examine her. He was worried about where the abrasions came from. Fernand looked menacingly at Dietrich. He asked him to tell him about Winter because the princess had arrived. Before he began to speak, saying that he wanted to give something away, Dietrich handed the emperor a document. Taking the paper from Winchester's hands, Fernand asked what it was. He was interested in the document. Smiling, Empress Genevieve asked if the princess was in the imperial palace, to which the maid replied with her consent. The empress asked how long Liliana had been arriving at the palace. The maid said that Fernand had hurriedly brought the princess in the morning. Looking down and smiling, Genevieve said that this time Liliana had fallen under Fernand's suspicions. The maid told that the princess had left the palace at night. Passing by the guards and maids sent by the emperor, the empress looked at the maid. The woman laughed. She was interested in the fact that the princess was trying to get free from the emperor's supervision. The empress thought that the princess had become completely miserable and had gone mad. Having cut off the rosebud, Genevieve thought that for weak people, beauty is equal to shackles. The empress, saying that she had not been able to get in touch with her brother for several days, told the maid to deliver a letter ordering her to appear at the empress's palace, and the maid bowed and informed her that she would give it to the Marquis of Bridge. Opening the door, the maid reported that Dietrich was currently in audience with the emperor. Putting her hand to her cheek, Genevieve asked, "She admired Winchester.